Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The rolling hills of northern Georgia hide more than just the whispers of wind through ancient oaks. In the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, nestled within Dawson County, lies the small settlement of Blackwood Creek, a place whose name has been all but erased from modern maps, perhaps for good reason. It was early March of 1903 when the Radcliffe family arrived in Blackwood Creek. Thomas Radcliffe, a stern-faced banker from Boston, had purchased the old Whitcomb estate, a sprawling Victorian home positioned on nearly 40 acres of dense woodland, approximately 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. With him came his wife Eleanor, a quiet woman of delicate constitution, and their 3 daughters, Margaret, 21, Victoria, 19, and Catherine, 17. According to records from the local registry office, Thomas Radcliffe paid a sum considerably below market value for the property. The previous owners, the Whitcomb family, had departed rather suddenly in the autumn of 1898 after nearly 30 years of residence. When questioned by locals, Thomas would simply state that he sought clean country air for his wife's respiratory ailments, though weather records indicate that northern Georgia's humid climate would have been particularly unsuitable for such conditions. The Radcliffe family's arrival caused quite a stir in the small community. As one local newspaper article dated March 12, 1903 noted, "The distinguished family from Massachusetts brings with them an air of sophistication and the promise of new investment in our humble region." What the article failed to mention was the peculiar manner in which the family conducted themselves. Martha Pearson, who worked as a housekeeper for the Radcliffes during their first months in Georgia, later provided a written account that was discovered among her personal effects after her death in 1922. In it, she described the family's unusual living arrangements. Mr. Radcliffe insisted upon separate bedrooms for everyone, including his wife. The young ladies were placed in the east wing, their father in the master bedroom of the west wing, and poor Mrs. Radcliffe in a smaller room adjacent to her husband's, with a connecting door that, as I observed while cleaning, was fitted with a lock on the outside. The Radcliffe daughters were a study in contrasts, according to multiple accounts. Margaret, the eldest, was described as severe and bookish, rarely seen without a volume of poetry or philosophy in hand. Victoria possessed a more vibrant disposition, often engaging with the locals during her supervised visits to town. Catherine, the youngest, was reportedly withdrawn to the point of near muteness, speaking only when directly addressed by her father. What drew particular attention was the father's rigid control over the household. Thomas Radcliffe established a set of rules that seemed excessive even by the standards of the era. According to Martha Pearson's account, the young ladies were forbidden from leaving the property without their father's escort. Mail was inspected before being distributed. Callers were rarely received, and when they were, Mr. Radcliffe remained present throughout the visit. Most peculiar was the household accounting. Every item, down to individual candles and cups of flour, was meticulously documented in Mr. Radcliffe's leather-bound ledger. The first 6 months of the Radcliffe's residence in Georgia passed without notable incident. Thomas established connections with the local bank, where he would spend 3 days each week. Eleanor was rarely seen outside the home, with most deliveries and errands handled by a manservant named Davis, who lived in quarters above the carriage house. It was in October of 1903 when the first troubling incident occurred. According to the journal of Dr. Harold Jenkins, who served the Blackwood Creek area from 1882 until 1916, he was summoned to the Radcliffe estate on the evening of October 23rd to attend to Eleanor Radcliffe. The entry reads, "Called to the Radcliffe home near midnight. Mrs. R, suffering from what the husband described as one of her episodes, found the patient in a state of extreme agitation, pupils dilated, pulse racing. No fever present. Upon examination, noted bruising on both wrists and upper arms. consistent with forceful restraint. When questioned privately, Mrs. R. became highly distressed and would only repeat, "It's behind the wall. I heard it moving." Mr. Radcliffe explained his wife suffered from delusions during these episodes, prescribed laudanum for immediate calming, and recommended rest. Unusual. Mr. Radcliffe insisted on administering the medication himself, refusing my direct treatment. What makes this account particularly noteworthy is the postscript Dr. Jenkins added the following day. Most disturbed by the Radcliffe case. The daughters watched from the doorway throughout my visit, silent as ghosts. The youngest, Catherine, I believe, had a peculiar fixed stare that followed my every movement. None spoke, even when addressed directly by me. The home itself feels oppressive, unusually cold in certain passages, particularly near the second-floor landing. Mrs. Radcliffe grabbed my arm as I departed and whispered, "The closet breathes." Mr. Radcliffe promptly ushered me out thereafter. The doctor's observations marked the beginning of what locals would later refer to as the darkening of the Radcliffe house. Throughout that winter, Eleanor Radcliffe's condition appeared to deteriorate. She ceased accompanying the family to their infrequent church attendances, and deliveries to the house increased to include various medicines and tonics from as far away as Atlanta. In his banking business, Thomas Radcliffe maintained his reputation as a shrewd and calculating man. James Harrington, a clerk at the Dawson County Bank during this period, noted in a letter to his brother, "Radcliffe seems to grow more prosperous, even as his household appears to be in decline. His investments are remarkably successful, though his methods strike many as unusual. He maintains separate accounts for each family member, yet he alone controls all transactions. Most curious is the account for Mrs. Radcliffe, which receives regular deposits, but from which no withdrawals are ever made." As winter gave way to spring in 1904, the Radcliffe household underwent a subtle transformation. Martha Pearson's employment was terminated in February, with Thomas Radcliffe citing financial necessity, a curious claim given his apparent business success. She was replaced by Agnes Miller, a young woman from a neighboring county who was reportedly deaf in one ear and simple-minded, according to community gossip. The three Radcliffe daughters became even more reclusive. Victoria, once the most sociable of the sisters, ceased her visits to town entirely. Deliveries were now exclusively handled by the manservant Davis, who became increasingly reluctant to engage with the locals. It was during this period that the first rumors about the upstairs closet began to circulate among the few workers who had access to the home. According to a statement given years later by Robert Fleming, who delivered coal to the estate, Davis mentioned that no one was allowed to open the large closet at the end of the upstairs hallway. Said the master kept it locked at all times. Said once he heard Miss Victoria crying outside that door, begging to be led away from it. When I asked what was kept in there, Davis just shook his head and said, "Nothing that should see the light of day." In June of 1904, Dr. Jenkins was again summoned to the Radcliffe home, this time to attend to Catherine, the youngest daughter. His journal entry from June 12th provides a troubling account. The young Miss Radcliffe appears to be suffering from severe malnourishment and what I can only describe as a profound melancholy. Physical examination revealed unusual markings on her back, thin, parallel lines that Mr. Radcliffe attributed to a fall against a garden trellis. The explanation seems implausible given the uniform nature of the marks. The doctor continued with observations about the home atmosphere. The house has taken on an unpleasant odor, a persistent mustiness that seems strongest near the upper floors. When I inquired about it, Mr. Radcliffe explained that recent rains had caused some dampness in the attic spaces. Mrs. Radcliffe was not present during my visit, reportedly confined to her bed with migraine. The other daughters remained in their rooms. I find the isolation of these women troubling. By the autumn of 1904, the Radcliffe family had essentially withdrawn from community life entirely. Thomas still attended to his banking business, but he now traveled to and from town alone, no longer bringing any family members with him. Deliveries to the house were left at the gate, with only Davis permitted to retrieve them. A curious document from this period exists in the form of a letter that was never delivered. Found among the personal effects of Victoria Radcliffe years later, it reads, "Dearest Aunt Marian, I pray this letter finds its way to you, though I have little hope of that outcome. Father has forbidden all correspondence, but I am desperate. Something is terribly wrong within these walls. Mother worsens daily. Margaret has surrendered entirely to Father's will. Catherine speaks of voices behind the wallpaper in her room. And then there is the closet, the terrible closet at the end of the hall. Father spends hours there some nights. We hear the scratching, the low moans. Once I glimpsed inside when he left it momentarily unlocked. The shelves, Aunt Marian. The awful, awful shelves. I beg you, if this reaches you, contact the authorities in Dawson County, Georgia, the Whitcomb estate, 3 miles north of Blackwood Creek. Your desperate niece, Victoria." The letter was written on the back of a page torn from a Bible, specifically from the Book of Revelation. Whether Victoria ever attempted to send it remains unknown. On December 7, 1904, a significant development occurred. Thomas Radcliffe arrived at the Dawson County Bank alone, appearing disheveled and agitated, a stark contrast to his typically immaculate presentation. According to the bank manager's log, Radcliffe withdrew substantial sums from all family accounts and requested the contents of his safe deposit box. When asked about his plans, he reportedly stated he would be traveling abroad indefinitely and that correspondence should be directed to a lawyer in Boston. 3 days later, on December 10th, smoke was observed rising from the chimney of the Radcliffe estate, despite unusually warm weather for December. Davis, the manservant, was seen in town purchasing large quantities of lye, ammonia, and burlap sacks, ostensibly for winter cleaning. What happened in the days that followed remains the subject of considerable speculation and the foundation of the lingering mystery. No members of the Radcliffe family were seen in town throughout December. Deliveries continued to be left at the gate, retrieved solely by Davis, whose demeanor was described by multiple sources as nervous and sickly. On December 23rd, Davis himself disappeared. His horse and small wagon were gone from the estate, and he did not return to his quarters above the carriage house. A subsequent investigation revealed that he had purchased a train ticket to New Orleans, though no confirmation of his arrival there was ever established. As Christmas approached, the absence of any signs of holiday preparations at the Radcliffe estate drew attention from their closest neighbors, the Harrison family, whose property began approximately 3 miles south. On December 27th, concerned by the lack of activity and the absence of smoke from the chimneys despite the dropping temperatures, Jeremiah Harrison and his eldest son rode to the Radcliffe home to check on the family's welfare. What they discovered would become the foundation of one of northern Georgia's most disturbing historical mysteries. According to Jeremiah Harrison's statement to local authorities, recorded in the Dawson County Sheriff's log, dated December 28, 1904. We approached the main house and found the front door unlocked. Upon entering, we immediately noticed a pervasive, unpleasant odor throughout the ground floor. The home appeared to have been abandoned hastily. Food remained on the dining table, now covered in mold. A fire had been lit in the study fireplace, but had long since gone cold, with partially burned papers among the ashes. We called out repeatedly, but received no response. Upstairs we found the bedrooms in disarray, clothing strewn about, personal items scattered. Mrs. Radcliffe's room contained numerous empty medicine bottles. The daughters' rooms showed signs of packing, drawers left open, items missing. Most disturbing was the locked closet at the end of the upper hallway. A powerful, fetid odor emanated from behind its door. Using tools from the groundskeeper's shed, we forced the lock. What we discovered defies easy explanation. Here the official record becomes vague, with the sheriff noting only that disturbing evidence of foul play was discovered and that the matter requires further investigation by county authorities. A more detailed account comes from a personal letter written by Jeremiah Harrison to his brother in Tennessee, dated January 2nd, 1905. I cannot shake the horror of what we found in that cursed closet. The space had been converted into something ungodly, the shelves lined with glass jars containing specimens I dare not describe in detail, journals filled with observations and measurements written in Radcliffe's precise hand, a collection of surgical tools stained dark with what could only be blood. But worst was the false wall at the back, which my son discovered accidentally. Behind it lay a small chamber, no larger than a priest's confessional, with shackles mounted to the wall. The floor was stained beyond redemption. Scratched into the wooden wall were tallies, hundreds of them, and what appeared to be names, though many were crossed out. Of the Radcliffe women themselves, we found no trace, save for a single shoe belonging to the youngest daughter and several long strands of what appeared to be the mother's silver-streaked hair, preserved in one of the specimen jars. The sheriff has sworn me to secrecy about the specifics, but I cannot keep such darkness entirely to myself. Burn this letter after reading, I beg you. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry alone. The investigation that followed was surprisingly brief by modern standards. The county sheriff, William Braddock, conducted a 3-day examination of the property before declaring it a crime scene. However, within a week, officials from Atlanta arrived and took charge of the case. According to courthouse records, these officials identified themselves as federal banking investigators, claiming jurisdiction due to Thomas Radcliffe's financial activities. The property was sealed off, with armed guards posted at the entrance for nearly 2 weeks. When these guards departed in mid-January of 1905, they took with them numerous crates and trunks removed from the home. The official report filed with the Dawson County Clerk's Office stated only that evidence of financial improprieties has been secured, with no mention of the family's disappearance or the disturbing contents of the upstairs closet. For several months, the Radcliffe estate stood abandoned. In April of 1905, a notice appeared in the local newspaper announcing that the property had reverted to bank ownership and would be sold at auction. Curiously, the auction drew no bidders, despite the property's substantial size and the quality of the main house. It was during this period of abandonment that the first accounts of unusual phenomena began to emerge. Jacob Thornton, a local youth who admitted to entering the property on a dare, provided the earliest documented report in a statement to the local newspaper editor, though the account was never published. "The place feels wrong, sir. Like the air itself is watching you. I made it as far as the upstairs hallway before I heard it. A soft scratching from behind the wall like nails on wood. Then breathing. I swear on my mother's Bible. I heard breathing from inside that wall. I ran and didn't look back." Similar accounts accumulated throughout 1905, with several local residents reporting unusual sounds, unexplained lights in the upper windows, and a persistent, unpleasant odor surrounding the property. Sheriff Braddock investigated these claims multiple times, but found no evidence of trespassers or natural explanations for the phenomena. In February of 1906, a significant development occurred when a Boston newspaper published a small article titled "Former Boston Banker Spotted in European Capital." The piece claimed that Thomas Radcliffe had been seen in Vienna, Austria, living under the name Thomas Blackwood and working as a private tutor to wealthy families. When contacted by the newspaper, Radcliffe allegedly denied his former identity before fleeing his lodgings. No mention was made of the whereabouts of his wife or daughters. This report prompted renewed interest in the case. The Dawson County Sheriff dispatched inquiries to authorities in Vienna, but received no confirmation of Radcliffe's presence there. Meanwhile, the property in Georgia remained unsold and increasingly fell into disrepair. In the autumn of 1906, nearly 2 years after the Radcliffes' disappearance, a new piece of evidence emerged that cast the entire case in an even more disturbing light. A leather-bound journal, apparently belonging to Margaret Radcliffe, was discovered by workers clearing brush near the property's eastern boundary. The journal had been protected from the elements by the oilskin wrapping in which it had been concealed. The contents of this journal were deemed so disturbing that Sheriff Braddock initially locked it in his office safe. However, a clerk named Joseph Williams later made a partial copy, which survived in private collections until being donated to the County Historical Society in 1968. The authenticity of this copy remains disputed, but its contents align with other known facts about the case. The journal entries begin in January of 1903, shortly before the family's relocation to Georgia, and continue sporadically until November of 1904. The early entries describe Margaret's reluctance to leave Boston and her suspicions about her father's true motives. January 18, 1903. Father announced today that we are to relocate to Georgia, of all places. He claims it is for Mother's health, but I observed them arguing in the study last night. Mother mentioned those poor girls in Springfield, and Father became enraged, threatening to finish what was started there. I fear there is more to this sudden move than we are being told. Subsequent entries document the family's journey south and their arrival at the Whitcomb estate. Margaret's descriptions of the property are telling. The house seems to have been selected for its isolation rather than its charm. Father spent an unusual amount of time examining the cellars and the curious closet at the end of the upstairs hallway, a space far larger inside than its exterior suggests, with an unusual draft that hints at hidden spaces beyond. As the journal progresses, Margaret's entries become increasingly concerned with her mother's deteriorating condition and her father's strange behaviors. April 30th, 1903. Mother's treatments have begun again. Father administers them himself, locked away in their bedroom. Victoria tried to intervene when we heard Mother's cries, but Father struck her across the face and threatened worse if any of us interfered with medical necessities. I have searched his medical books, but can find no treatment that would cause such distress. June 15th, 1903. Father has begun bringing his work home from town, not banking papers, but something else. He spends hours in the upstairs closet, which he has fitted with a sturdy lock. Strange odors emerge from beneath the door. Catherine says she hears whispers from within when Father is away. I told her it was merely the wind, but I do not believe this myself. The most troubling entries begin in early 1904 as Margaret describes changes in her father's behavior toward his daughters. February 23, 1904. Father has begun calling Victoria to his study for private conversations that leave her shaken and silent. Today I noticed a small red mark on her wrist, as though something had been inserted beneath her skin. When questioned, she claimed it was merely a scratch from the garden, but her eyes told a different truth. April 10th, 1904. Catherine was summoned to the closet today. She emerged 3 hours later, pale and disoriented. Father recorded measurements in his red ledger, the one he keeps separate from his banking records. When I asked Catherine what had happened, she only stared at the wallpaper and whispered, "The shelves are full of bottles, and the bottles are full of us." The journal documents Margaret's growing awareness of her father's activities, though she often writes in a coded manner that suggests either a reluctance to fully acknowledge what was occurring or a fear that her journal might be discovered. July 8, 1904. Mother discovered the truth today. I heard her confronting Father about the specimens and the missing local girls. There was a terrible crash, then silence. At dinner, Mother's chair was empty. Father explained that she had experienced a severe episode and required isolation. Her bedroom door remains locked, but I hear nothing from within. August 16, 1904. Victoria attempted to send a letter today. Father intercepted it and administered correction in the cellar. The sounds will haunt me until my death. I am a coward for not intervening, but Father has grown so much stronger since we arrived here, while we all waste away. Something feeds his vitality even as it drains ours. The final entries become increasingly fragmented and suggest that Margaret herself was beginning to experience some form of mental deterioration. October 3, 1904. The walls between the closet and other spaces grow thinner. I hear its breathing in my bedroom now, though the closet is down the hall. Father says I am to be processed next week. He requires my cooperation for his great work. Catherine has not spoken for 6 days. Victoria plots escape, but there is nowhere to run. The locals are blind to what happens here, or perhaps they choose not to see. November 17, 1904, written in shaky handwriting. Father has begun the final preparations. Davis brings large quantities of chemicals in glass containers. The basement has been prepared with new drainage channels. Mother is gone, not dead, but transformed, according to Father. I have seen the thing in the hidden chamber behind the closet wall. It wears Mother's face on a form that is no longer human. Parts of her have been preserved in Father's collection. He says we will all contribute to the advancement of his understanding. Victoria will be next, then Catherine. I am to be last, as Father requires my assistance with the others. May God forgive me for what I have become complicit in. This final entry is followed by several pages of seemingly random numbers and letters, possibly a cipher that has never been decoded. The journal ends abruptly, with no further entries documenting the final weeks before the family's disappearance. The discovery of Margaret's journal prompted a renewed but brief investigation. Sheriff Braddock and 2 deputies conducted a thorough search of the property in November of 1906, particularly focusing on the basement area mentioned in the final entries. According to the official report, they discovered evidence of recent excavation and the installation of an elaborate drainage system beneath the northeast corner of the structure. However, no human remains or other evidence of criminal activity were documented. Curiously, the report also notes that the upstairs closet, central to many rumors surrounding this property, was found to be a simple storage space of normal dimensions, with no evidence of the false wall or hidden chamber alleged in local accounts. This directly contradicts Jeremiah Harrison's earlier description of the space, suggesting either an error in one of the accounts or, more disturbingly, that significant alterations had been made to the property between investigations. Throughout 1907 and 1908, the Radcliffe case gradually faded from local attention. The property remained unsold, but trespassers and curiosity seekers became less frequent as newer scandals and concerns occupied the community's interest. Sheriff Braddock retired in 1909, taking with him much of the institutional knowledge of the case. A potentially significant development occurred in April of 1910 when a woman claiming to be Catherine Radcliffe appeared at the office of a lawyer in Atlanta. According to the lawyer's notes from their meeting, the woman, described as gaunt, prematurely aged, and bearing unusual scars along her hairline, sought information about reclaiming the Blackwood Creek property. She provided enough personal details about the Radcliffe family to establish her potential identity, but when the lawyer suggested contacting authorities in Dawson County to confirm her claims, she reportedly became agitated and fled the office. The lawyer reported this encounter to Atlanta police, who made inquiries but were unable to locate the woman. A sketch based on the lawyer's description was circulated briefly, but yielded no further information. Whether this woman was truly Catherine Radcliffe remains unconfirmed. In 1912, nearly 8 years after the family's disappearance, a fire of unknown origin destroyed much of the main house on the former Radcliffe property. By the time firefighters from neighboring areas arrived, the structure was largely consumed. Curiously, the fire appeared to have started in the vicinity of the upstairs closet that had featured so prominently in accounts of the case. During the subsequent clearing of debris, workers made a discovery that reignited interest in the Radcliffe mystery. Beneath the charred floorboards of the upstairs hallway, a space was found containing a metal box. Inside were approximately 50 glass slides of the type used for microscope examinations, each carefully labeled in what was identified as Thomas Radcliffe's handwriting. The labels bore dates ranging from 1896 to 1904, with notations such as ER, liver tissue, stage 2, and VR blood composition after third treatment. These slides were turned over to Dr. Harold Jenkins, who had attended the family years earlier. His examination, documented in a letter to the new county sheriff, described the contents as human biological specimens in various states of preservation, and noted that certain slides appear to show cellular anomalies consistent with systematic poisoning or chemical alteration. Dr. Jenkins recommended that the slides be sent to medical authorities in Atlanta for further analysis. However, there is no record that this analysis ever occurred. According to shipping records, the package containing the slides was dispatched from Blackwood Creek on May 7, 1912, but no receipt was ever acknowledged by the intended recipients in Atlanta. The slides themselves have never resurfaced in any known collection or archive. Following the fire, the land was finally sold at auction to a timber company that had no interest in rebuilding the structure. The remaining foundations were bulldozed in 1914, and much of the surrounding forest was harvested over the subsequent decade, erasing most physical traces of the Radcliffe occupation. The case might have been forgotten entirely were it not for a series of articles published in a regional newspaper in 1922, nearly 20 years after the events. Titled The Madman of Blackwood Creek, the 5-part series recounted the Radcliffe mystery with significant embellishments and unsubstantiated claims. The articles alleged that Thomas Radcliffe had been a disciple of forbidden scientific practices who had sacrificed his own family in pursuit of unnatural longevity. While largely sensationalistic, these articles did contain one new piece of potential evidence: a reproduced photograph purportedly showing Thomas Radcliffe in Cairo, Egypt, dated 1920. The elderly but robust man in the image bears a striking resemblance to known photographs of Radcliffe, down to a distinctive scar above his right eyebrow. The photograph shows him in the company of several Egyptian men identified as antiquities dealers, examining what appears to be a mummified human hand. The provenance of this photograph has never been verified, and many historians consider it likely to be a fabrication created to enhance the newspaper series. However, shipping records do confirm that a man traveling under the name T.R. Blackwood journeyed from New York to Alexandria, Egypt, in January of 1920, providing a tantalizing possibility that Thomas Radcliffe did indeed survive long after the disappearance of his family. Perhaps the most disturbing postscript to the case emerged in 1923, when construction workers breaking ground for a new road approximately 15 miles from the former Radcliffe property discovered an unmarked grave containing 3 female bodies. Forensic examination, primitive by modern standards, established that the women had died approximately 15 to 20 years prior to their discovery. Most significantly, one of the bodies, estimated to have been a woman in her 40s at the time of death, bore evidence of extensive surgical modifications, including what the examining physician described as numerous small excisions of tissue from vital organs performed at intervals over an extended period, with evidence of healing between procedures. The other 2 bodies, younger women in their 20s, showed similar patterns of surgical intervention. None of the women could be positively identified, and the circumstances surrounding their burial remained unexplained. However, the timing and nature of the findings led many locals to speculate about a connection to the long-missing Radcliffe women. The bodies were eventually reinterred in the Blackwood Creek Cemetery under markers reading simply "Unknown Female, circa 1905." With no definitive resolution, the case of the Radcliffe family and their ghastly closet gradually transformed from recent history to local legend. By the 1930s, versions of the story had incorporated increasingly supernatural elements absent from the original accounts. Children in nearby communities told tales of the specimen man who collected pieces of his victims in jars, while the property itself, by then reclaimed by forest growth, gained a reputation as cursed ground that locals avoided especially after dark. In 1946, a historian from the University of Georgia attempted to compile a definitive account of the case, interviewing elderly residents who had known the Radcliffes or been involved in the subsequent investigations. His work, never published but preserved in university archives, concluded that while criminal activity certainly occurred at the Radcliffe estate, many details of the case have been irretrievably obscured by time, sensationalism, and the deliberate suppression of evidence by unknown parties. The historian did, however, uncover one final piece of the puzzle that had previously gone unreported. In the personal papers of the late Dr. Harold Jenkins, he discovered a sealed envelope marked Radcliffe Analysis, not for public knowledge. Inside was a single sheet containing the doctor's observations of the microscope slides found after the fire. His notes state, "Having examined the provided specimens at length, I must record my professional conclusion that Thomas Radcliffe was conducting systematic tissue extraction and blood modification among his family members." The slides show progressive changes consistent with his apparent methodology, moving from minor alterations to significant cellular reconstruction. Most disturbing is slide Monger 37, labeled ER Final Transformation, which shows tissue unlike any I have encountered in 40 years of medical practice, neither fully human nor identifiably animal, but something that science has no category for. Whatever Radcliffe hoped to achieve through his experiments, he was working at the boundaries of natural law itself. May God have mercy on the souls of those women, for I fear they experienced horrors beyond our comprehension. The lands that once held the Radcliffe estate have changed hands many times over the decades. By the early 1950s, most local residents had no direct knowledge of the events that had transpired there nearly half a century earlier. The forest had reclaimed much of the property, erasing nearly all physical evidence of the Victorian home and its disturbing history. However, one artifact from the Radcliffe case resurfaced in 1954, when the contents of a bank vault in Dawson County were inventoried following the institution's closure. Among unclaimed safety deposit items was a small leather case containing what appeared to be personal effects, including a silver locket bearing the initials VR, presumably belonging to Victoria Radcliffe. Inside the locket was a tightly folded piece of paper with microscopic writing, apparently created using a pin or similar fine-pointed instrument. When examined under magnification, the text revealed itself to be a message. If found, know that we did not leave willingly. Father's work continues beneath. He believes he has discovered the key to transcendence through systematic extraction and preservation. Mother was the first to be fully processed. Margaret has submitted willingly. I fight still, but my strength fades. The basement chambers grow, the specimens multiply. Father speaks of relocating his collection soon. Whoever finds this, burn the grounds to ash. What grows there now is no longer human. The note was dated December 1st, 1904, mere days before the family's disappearance was discovered. The handwriting analysis, conducted by a graphologist in Atlanta, confirmed its likely authenticity based on comparison with known samples of Victoria Radcliffe's penmanship from school records. This discovery prompted a brief revival of interest in the case. In the summer of 1955, an amateur historian named Edward Collins conducted ground-penetrating surveys of the former estate using equipment that had been developed during the Second World War. His findings, documented in a self-published monograph titled Secrets Beneath the Radcliffe Mystery Revisited, indicated the presence of extensive subterranean modifications not consistent with standard basement construction of the era. Collins theorized that Thomas Radcliffe had expanded the original cellar of the Whitcomb house to create a network of underground chambers, possibly connecting to natural cave systems known to exist throughout the region. His attempts to excavate these areas were halted by the property's then owner, a lumber company that refused access for liability reasons. The most compelling evidence supporting Collins's theory emerged in 1958, when severe flooding affected much of northern Georgia. In the aftermath, a sinkhole appeared near the former location of the Radcliffe home's rear garden. Local authorities, concerned about public safety, investigated the opening and discovered a narrow passage leading to what appeared to be a man-made chamber, approximately 15 feet below ground level. According to the official report filed by Deputy Sheriff James Lawson, the chamber measured roughly 12 feet by 14 feet and contained remnants of what appeared to be laboratory equipment, glass fragments, corroded metal fixtures, and drainage channels cut into the stone floor. Most disturbing was the discovery of a set of iron restraints bolted to one wall, sized to fit an adult human. Further exploration revealed 2 additional chambers connected by narrow passages. One contained several large stone tables with grooved surfaces leading to central drainage points. The other, smallest chamber held what Lawson described as a collection of niches or compartments carved into the rock wall, each approximately 2 feet square, most empty, but some containing fragments of preserved organic material, too degraded for identification. The underground complex showed signs of deliberate sealing prior to its abandonment. Several passages had been blocked with masonry that later collapsed, suggesting an attempt to conceal the chamber's existence. Carbon dating of wooden support beams indicated construction likely occurred between 1898 and 1905, precisely the period of the Radcliffes' residence. After documenting the site, county officials ordered the passages filled with concrete to eliminate the safety hazard. Before this was completed, however, several unauthorized explorations reportedly took place, with local youths entering the chambers despite police warnings. One such trespasser, 17-year-old Michael Deering, later required psychiatric treatment for what his medical records described as acute stress reaction following exposure to disturbing historical artifacts. Deering reportedly collected several items from the chambers, including a small glass vial containing preserved tissue, which his parents subsequently destroyed. The discovery of these underground chambers provided physical confirmation of at least some elements of Victoria Radcliffe's hidden note and Margaret's journal accounts. Thomas Radcliffe had indeed constructed an elaborate subterranean complex, presumably for conducting the work described in these documents. What exactly that work entailed and how it related to the disappearance of the Radcliffe women remained a matter of speculation. Public interest in the case waned again after the chambers were sealed, and for nearly 2 decades the Radcliffe mystery received little attention beyond occasional mentions in compilations of regional historical oddities. In 1972, however, a potentially significant development occurred when the County Historical Society received a donation of personal papers from the estate of Agnes Miller, the simple-minded young woman who had replaced Martha Pearson as the Radcliffe's housekeeper in early 1904. Miller had died in 1969 at the age of 87, having spent most of her life in a neighboring county. She had never married and had left no direct descendants, with her meager possessions being processed by a distant cousin who discovered the papers. Among these papers was a small notebook containing what appeared to be a record of Agnes Miller's observations during her employment at the Radcliffe home. The entries, written in a crude hand with numerous spelling errors, provide a unique perspective on the household's final months. March 12, 1904. Mr. R. has me clean all rooms except the closet and the basement. Mrs. R. stays in bed most days, the girls quiet, except when father takes them to the closet one at a time, Miss Victoria cries after. Miss Margaret writes in her book when she thinks no one sees. April 30th, 1904. Found strange thing today. Glass jar with something floating in it, hidden in Miss Catherine's drawer. Looked like finger but too long and bent wrong. Put it back and told no one. Miss Catherine watches me from doorways, never blinking. June 17th, 1904. Mr. R. takes meals in basement now. Sends Davis for special deliveries from Atlanta. Heavy packages come at night. Mrs. R. hasn't been seen for 8 days. Mr. R. says she's visiting family, but her clothes still in drawers. August 8, 1904. Davis showed me hole in wall by kitchen pantry. Says we can hear them talking in basement. Listen today. Mr. are talking about extraction process and viable specimens. Woman crying, voice not Mrs. R. or the girls. Davis says other people, sometimes brought to house at night, never leave. September 23, 1904. Miss Margaret different now. Eyes empty. Helps her father in basement. Miss Victoria tried to run yesterday. Davis and Mr. R. brought her back. She screaming about jars and what he's doing to us all. Door to her room locked from outside now. November 2, 1904. Davis says we should leave. Says Mr. R. planned something bad for everyone in house. Says Mr. R. talks about final phase and complete transformation. Offered Davis money from my wages to take me away. He promised by Christmas we'll be gone. The notebook ends abruptly with no indication of whether Agnes Miller left the Radcliffe home before the family's disappearance or what she might have witnessed in those final weeks. No record exists of her whereabouts in December 1904 or early 1905, and she apparently never spoke publicly about her experiences with the Radcliffes during her long life afterward. What makes Agnes Miller's account particularly valuable is its corroboration of certain elements mentioned in other sources, while adding new details from a different perspective. Her mention of other people brought to the house aligns with Margaret Radcliffe's cryptic journal reference to missing local girls and raises disturbing possibilities about the scope of Thomas Radcliffe's activities. The historical record contains one other piece of evidence that supports this troubling suggestion. In a review of newspaper archives from 1899 through 1905, conducted by a graduate student in 1978, 3 reports were discovered of young women disappearing from communities within a 30-mile radius of Blackwood Creek during the Radcliffes' residence there. The first, dated July 1899, describes the disappearance of Ruth Collins, 22, a teacher at a rural school approximately 20 miles from the Radcliffe property. The second, from April 1902, reports that Mary Winters, 19, vanished while returning home from work at a textile mill in a neighboring county. The third, from August 1904, concerns Elizabeth Harper, 24, who disappeared after telling friends she had been offered a position as a companion to an elderly woman at a large estate. None of these disappearances was ever solved, and no direct evidence links them to Thomas Radcliffe. However, the timing and geographical proximity, combined with Agnes Miller's account of unknown women being brought to the house, suggest a disturbing pattern that extends beyond Radcliffe's apparent experimentation on his own family members. In 1982, a final piece of the Radcliffe puzzle emerged when renovations at a small hotel in Vienna, Austria, uncovered a sealed compartment within a wall of room 23. Inside was a leather portfolio containing papers and photographs dating to 1921. Among these was a document written in English titled Principles of Cellular Extraction and Preservation for Extended Vitality, attributed to T.R. Blackwood, formerly of Massachusetts and Georgia, United States. The 43-page manuscript outlines a pseudoscientific theory proposing that human longevity could be extended by systematically removing and preserving tissue samples from related individuals, particularly female relatives, and then reintroducing processed extracts into the originator's system. The document describes a successful methodology developed through extensive experimentation and includes detailed anatomical illustrations showing extraction sites on the human body. Most chillingly, the manuscript includes an appendix listing successful transformations with initials and dates corresponding to Eleanor, Margaret, Victoria, and Catherine Radcliffe, alongside 17 other sets of initials not identified by name. The final entry, dated October 1920, notes, "Preservation complete, original specimens maintained, self-regeneration now possible without additional donors." The Viennese authorities who discovered the manuscript forwarded it to Interpol, which eventually shared the information with American authorities. However, given the decades that had passed since the events in Georgia, no formal investigation was reopened. The document itself was stored in federal archives, where it remained largely forgotten until a Freedom of Information Act request in 2001 made it available to researchers. Analysis of the handwriting in the Vienna manuscript confirms its likely authorship by Thomas Radcliffe, suggesting he did indeed survive long after leaving Georgia and continued his disturbing work in Europe. The document makes reference to associates in Cairo and Damascus who shared his interests, hinting at a wider network involved in these unethical experiments. The fate of Thomas Radcliffe himself remains unknown. No death certificate or burial record has ever been located under either his original name or his known alias of Thomas Blackwood. The Vienna manuscript represents the last confirmed trace of his existence, though unsubstantiated reports of an elderly American man matching his description surfaced in Morocco in 1932 and in Argentina as late as 1945. As for the Radcliffe women, Eleanor, Margaret, Victoria, and Catherine, no conclusive evidence of their ultimate fate exists beyond the underground chambers and specimen collections discovered decades after their disappearance. The 3 unidentified female bodies found near Blackwood Creek in 1923 remain the most likely candidates, though this can never be confirmed with certainty. The physical locations associated with the case have largely vanished with time. The land where the Radcliffe house once stood was eventually incorporated into a state forest preserve in 1971. The underground chambers were permanently sealed during highway expansion work in 1987. Blackwood Creek itself, once a small but vibrant community, gradually depopulated throughout the mid-20th century, with the last business closing in 1992. Today, little remains to mark the site of one of Georgia's most disturbing historical mysteries. Hikers in the state forest occasionally report finding fragments of Victorian-era bricks or glass near the former house location. But nature has largely reclaimed the grounds. The 3 unmarked graves in the Blackwood Creek Cemetery were relocated during cemetery renovations in 1967, with the remains moved to a common plot with no individual markers. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Radcliffe case is its impact on local folklore. Throughout northern Georgia, variants of the specimen man legend persist, typically featuring a doctor or scientist who preserves pieces of his victims in jars. Parents in rural communities still occasionally warn misbehaving children that the man with the bottles will collect them after dark. For historians and criminologists, the case represents a troubling example of how wealth, isolation, and the social structures of the early 20th century could allow predatory behavior to continue undetected. Thomas Radcliffe's position as a respected banker, combined with the era's patriarchal norms that gave him near complete control over his household, created circumstances in which his increasingly disturbing activities remained hidden until it was too late for his family. The Radcliffe case also illustrates how historical investigations can be hampered by official indifference, lost evidence, and the passage of time. Despite multiple investigations over more than a century, crucial questions remain unanswered. What precisely was Thomas Radcliffe attempting to achieve through his experiments? How many victims, beyond his immediate family, did his activities claim? And perhaps most disturbingly, did he ultimately succeed in whatever transformation he sought? In 2005, ground-penetrating radar technology was used to survey the area around the former Radcliffe property as part of an environmental assessment. The resulting images revealed several anomalies approximately 20 feet below the surface that did not appear to be natural geological formations. Due to the protected status of the forest preserve, no excavation was permitted to investigate these features further. They remained there still, unexamined chambers beneath the forest floor, perhaps containing the final answers to the mystery of the Radcliffe family and their ghastly closet of specimens. Some secrets, it seems, are destined to remain buried, preserved in darkness like the specimens in Thomas Radcliffe's collection, neither fully revealed nor entirely forgotten. Visitors to the area today report an unusual silence in the vicinity of the former estate, a stillness that seems deeper than the natural quiet of the forest. Rangers working in the preserve occasionally mention a persistent, faint odor of chemicals that emerges from the ground after heavy rains, though environmental testing has never identified its source. And so the story ends, not with definitive answers, but with lingering questions that echo through time like footsteps in an empty house. The Radcliffe women, Eleanor, Margaret, Victoria, and Catherine, remain shadows caught between history and legend, their true experiences known only to themselves and the man who claimed to preserve parts of them in his terrible collection. In the words of the local historian who compiled the most complete account of the case, the horror of the Radcliffe mystery lies not in ghost stories or supernatural elements, but in the very human capacity for calculated cruelty masked behind respectability. No phantom or specter could be more terrifying than Thomas Radcliffe himself, a man who systematically destroyed those he was meant to protect, all while maintaining the facade of the respectable family man. His legacy reminds us that sometimes the greatest darkness lurks not in abandoned houses or forgotten graves, but behind the eyes of those we are taught to trust without question.